you'll notice in your program that that is phrased actually as a question, because some might argue that geopolitics actually never went away, while others have said, oh, they faded into oblivion really at the end of the Cold War, when Western liberalism claimed a sort of global victory at the time. Well, we know that dynamic has changed dramatically in recent years, and most everyone has recognized a sort of new world order. And sadly, some have noted a new Cold War as new powers rise to challenge what we've grown comfortable or uncomfortable with over the last few decades. So I'd like to get started as quickly as possible and just introduce my panelists to discuss A World in Disarray, the return of geopolitics. First, I have to my left the former president of the United Nations General Assembly and a member of Turkish Parliament, Volkan Bozkır. Great to have you. And to his left is Romania's former prime minister, Mr. Victor Ponta. Also with us is Rwanda's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Vincent Biruta. And the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs, Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. And last but not least, head of the European Union delegation to Turkey, Ambassador Nikolaos Meyer-Landrut. Thanks all so much for being with us. I'll tell you what, I'm going to start with a broader question to establish where each of you stands. When you hear just the mention of a new Cold War and dramatically shifting global dynamics that could lead to serious instability, some even fear all-out war. Volkan Bozkır, how seriously do you take it? Do you think the world is actually on the brink of further crises, or are the right people in the lead at this point to take us toward better and more stable global relations? There you go.
I think the world has faced important earthquakes in the last few years. First was, of course, the COVID pandemic. The world was not prepared, and to overcome it took many different type of efforts. But the invasion of Ukraine by Russia is another earthquake. But we must not look to this earthquake as if it is just a military operation. It will have many other consequences on food security, energy security, to reach the other parts of the world. And I think because of this, the United Nations, NATO, and the European Union couldn't pass the stress test. And that is another problem we're going to deal. When we talk about a new world order, we must also look into our hands, what we have. We have the United Nations, a post-war, post-Second World War institution, which is wonderful with UNICEF, UNESCO, UNCTAD, or whatever the side institutions are. But when it comes to politics, UN is not a successful authority. But what can we do about it is the other question. We don't have the luxury to replace it with a new entity, so we have to live with it. But what I'm continuously saying is we can't face the 21st century problems with 20th century tools. So that is the difficulty. We thought that there were two buttons in the world, the buttons of the United States and the button of the Russia. But it came out to be that there was only one button. By pushing the US button, Russia can't even send basketball teams to the EuroLeague, or the tennis players are prohibited. I mean, everywhere they have been blocked. And the return to this button is not there. So we were talking about a bipolar world. We are also now thinking about what will China do? What will be the new dimensions of these balances? Where will this bring us? But when there's 800 million people at the brink of starvation, or same amount of people don't have electricity, and the UN is incapable of handling these situations, I think we must look to not only to a new world order, but if you give me the floor again, I will explain to you what can be done and what can't be done. Thank you very much.
Okay. Let me turn to Ambassador Meyer-Landrut. I know you have very limited time. In fact, only, I think, 15 more minutes that we have you here. So yeah, same question to you. And from what I gather, you are a bit, the glass is half empty on this question.
Okay. Well, thank you for the question. Thank you for having us here. I think what we have to realize is that we have a war. And this war is a war of aggression, and it's a war of conquest, where, if you want, military imperialism is back on this continent. And this war is not only unlawful and unjustified, unprovoked, but it has consequences which go far beyond our geography and our region. And so this is a war which concerns us all, and it's the Russian aggression. And why is this concerning us all? I just would make 3 points. First point, if aggression pays, if conquest by force again becomes something which is acceptable, then this can happen everywhere across the world. So this is something which we cannot accept. Territorial integrity, sovereignty of Ukraine is key. And Russia is breaking this and is breaking international commitments and so on. So this is the first point. This cannot become a precedent, should not become a precedent, and Ukrainian territorial integrity needs to be preserved. Sovereignty needs to be preserved. The second point was mentioned is energy. We have a huge increase in energy costs, and again, the origin of the increase in the energy costs, which all our populations face, is Russia. It is Russia which started to use energy as a political tool, some said even weaponizing, even before the war starts. So this is where it starts. Now we have to draw our consequences from this. And on the grain, on the food, it's the same. It is Russia which in the beginning blocked the Ukrainian ports and made it impossible for Ukraine to deliver grain to the world markets. Now, thanks to Turkey and its president, and we rightfully congratulated the Turkish president this morning on his initiative and on his actions on the grain deal, but still the beginning of all this is a Russian aggression. So I would say, as a bottom line, and Edi Rama said it in the beginning, this war of aggression is a watershed for European security order. This is the European 9/11. Nothing will be as it was before, and we will all have to face up to it. Thank you.
The European 9/11. You know, it's interesting. I actually remember hosting debates in 2007 discussing whether or not Russia was using or planning to use gas as a weapon. And here we are today. General Kimmitt, I'll turn to you next, as I'm very curious to hear what you have to say with your decades of experience with the U.S. military.
Well, I think if you talk about the actual...
No, make sure it's
green. Yes.
Yeah.
Green. All right. I think if you ask the question about is there a new Cold War, first of all, I think our fellow panelists have talked about the current hot war that's going on inside Europe, and I agree with them. But if you want to look at where there is a new Cold War, it's the Cold War that's happening in the Pacific. If you take a look at what is happening, where there's an ideological challenge between China, America, and America's allies, an economic war in that region, a military buildup in that region, to the point where America now sees China as a pacing threat and soon to be a near competitor to the United States. It looks very much like as the situation did in the 50s and 60s between Western Europe, the United States, and the Soviet Union. So while there may be a hot war going on inside of Europe, there certainly is a Cold War in the Pacific between America, its allies, and a very rising and very belligerent China and its long-term aspirations.
Let me call on Vincent Peruta. Please go ahead.
So, I think, as it was said earlier, geopolitics have always been here in the world. And competition and rivalry is not necessarily a bad thing. What is bad is when this rivalry or competition is degenerates into an open conflict or a war. So we need to put in place or we need to strengthen the systems which are there to prevent that competition and rivalry degenerate into open conflict. We have referred to the UN system. The UN is there with its own weaknesses, and it is our duty to just to find a way to fill the gaps and to make the necessary adjustment to make sure that the UN reflects the world in which we are living, so that everybody is represented and that the UN becomes more efficient. But so far, I don't see any other system we have to replace the UN. We should eventually focus on reforming it and making it as representative as possible. So that's what I can say.
Just very quickly though, do you see regional organizations like the African Union in bits and pieces as a replacement for one larger organization like the UN, or could it never have the same kind of cohesiveness in order to get the same momentum and policy, force and policy?
So the African Union has been restructuring itself just to make itself relevant. And what we need in the international system is that we need the African Union to be represented, better represented in the UN Security Council, or even to be represented as a member of the G20. So for this to be achieved, African Union just need to reform itself, to have a voice, and to make sure that it is present on the international scene, and to make a good thing for the world to have all the parts of the world be equally represented. In this multipolar system, the African Union should need just to be one of the poles, a pole which counts and which can deal with other poles as an equal partner. So that is how I see the African Union becoming relevant and having a say in the world business.
I feel the same. Yeah, thank you. No. Okay. Mr. Ponta, the same initial question for you. And if we could also look at, Romania specifically as a NATO country and a member of the EU, and looking at this new world order, how the war in Ukraine has changed things, has it helped or hindered prospects for unity and cohesion in the European Union as well?
So, first of all, good afternoon. I hope I'm heard. I'm very proud and happy to be invited to this panel with the other distinguished panelists. We have a very difficult task because after lunch panels are always the most difficult. Now you turned off the lights, so but please wake up because I'm not a politician anymore and I can speak out exactly what I think about the situation. And I was very happy to listen this morning to President Erdogan and Prime Minister Rama, also being less politician and more speaking to what the people really think and what the people really, addressing the really worries of the people. So you asked a question at the beginning. Yes, I was born in a communist country behind the Iron Curtain. I was lucky enough to be young when we became democratic. We joined NATO, European Union. Now I'm unhappy to see the Iron Curtain just moving from the Berlin or from the communist countries to Donetsk area and to the border of Ukraine and Russia. It's nothing to make me happy. It's nothing to make me feel the world is better. On the contrary. It's like just we were able, this time I was more fortunate to be on the good side of the Iron Curtain, not on the bad side. But having an Iron Curtain doesn't make me happy at all. From this crisis and from this war, which was obviously started by Russia and by Mr. Putin, I think he's maybe now the most unhappy person that he started. There is one positive achievement and one negative achievement from my point of view as a European Union member and a European citizen. The positive achievement is that militarily I feel more secure. The American involvement, clear involvement, not only in Ukraine but also the other countries, Romania, Poland, makes me feel safe. I don't think Russia can attack anymore a NATO country. I think the lesson of technology, military capacity, and solidarity of NATO countries, it's a lesson learned by everyone. So this is the positive part. Once again, I feel safer. We will spend more for military, but makes me feel safer. The negative part is makes me feel poorer. Europe has managed very badly, in my opinion, the economic part of the conflict. The military and the political one, I agree. But the economic part, the huge rise of energy prices, inflation, lack of economic hope for European citizens, this makes me very unhappy because it's not something that I feel it will pass next year or in 2 years. On the contrary. And European citizens, they feel tired. They are like, yes, it's normal, it's logical, it's good to support Ukraine, but why do we have to pay such high prices for energy? Why do we have inflation? Why don't we have a strategy to remain Europe as a strong player? And I don't think we have it. It's not a critique to the distinguished ambassador of the European Union, even though he knows I'm very, very angry on the European Union because yesterday, again, they said Romania and Bulgaria cannot be in the Schengen area. So wait for you Turkish people to have no visa as it was promised by the European Union. No, we've been there for 15 years and we are still not accepted in the Schengen area. I think this is a good motivation for Mr. Putin to celebrate whenever we are unhappy. So this is the negative part. I see countries, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, with smart leadership, being prepared for the energy crisis, taking advantage of energy crisis. And I see countries in the European Union which are completely unprepared, still almost one year after starting of the war, and having no hope for the future. So that makes me unhappy. And in the end, because the minister said that geopolitics, it's always there, I think that we had the illusion 20 years that we will not have another Iron Curtain, that we will have an open world and we can just take care of how to develop our countries and the level of life of the people. Now it seems to be an illusion, and people will suffer the most, not the politicians and the leaders. Thank you very much.
As is sadly often the case. Ambassador Meyer-Landrut, if you don't mind, I'd like you to go ahead and respond to what Mr. Ponte had to say.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I think we agree on the cohesion which Europe has shown politically, the investments and the engagement Europe has shown on the military side to support Ukraine. And I'm also happy to see how much this has been done in a transatlantic tandem. I think this is very, very important also to stress that. On the energy prices, I must say we should not forget where is the origin. The origin of high energy prices is Russian policy. It's not Europe. The high food prices, the origin is not Europe, the origin is Russia. And the European Union has taken a very fundamental decision to disengage from Russian fossil fuels. This comes with a price, undoubtedly. This is something which will accelerate green transition in Europe. We have seen in November gas consumption in Europe being down 25%. So it seems that there is space for also energy savings. Yes, energy prices feed into inflation. Yes, energy prices, but not only in Europe, are a burden also in this country and around the world. I'm sure that we will turn our energy policy into something which is more sustainable and something which will manage for Europe an energy situation which is much more independent than we were in the past.
Okay. Ambassador Meyer-Landrut, I will let you go at this point. We'd like to thank you so much for being with us. He needs to navigate his way through Istanbul traffic to get to the airport in time. Thank you so much for joining us. Then Ambassador Bozkır, if I could come back to you, because
I
in...
hope he was not leaving because of my remarks.
I don't know. Ask him.
But honestly, if I am a member of the European Union for 15 years and I'm not accepted in Schengen area, what can we say to Turkish people? What can we say to the Western Balkans people? I mean, it's just the reality.
Well, let's hear what our Turkish
Perhaps the
panelist has
ambassador
to
is
say.
leaving not to listen to me.
And I wanted to ask you exactly that. Go ahead, as a Turkish
Okay.
citizen.
Let me start with the European Union part. I think Prime Minister Ponta said that he's not a politician anymore. I think he's not a prime minister anymore, but politician is always a politician, so I don't agree with him. Secondly, as Turkey is going to celebrate or remember the 60th anniversary of its association agreement in 1963, Turkey has shown that it is the most tolerable, patient, and reliable candidate to become member to the European Union. So I would suggest Prime Minister Ponta to be also patient, tolerable, but also decided in dealing with the European Union. One president of the European Union said once upon a time that if there is a political consensus, you will become member in a few weeks. But if there is no political consensus, then they will say the color of your tomato is not red enough, or the other vegetables produced are not green enough. So they will keep you waiting for many, many years. So we're waiting for the European Union to see that our tomato is more red than many other member countries. Having said that, if we look at the Ukrainian invasion of Russia, I think we're facing a very difficult situation. But the reality is that the post-Second World War institutions, the United Nations, IMF, World Bank, the dollarization of the whole world economy, is once again repeated. And the United States, without firing a single bullet, has shown that without the United States, NATO is not strong enough, EU cannot handle the military situation, and the world is more dependent on the United States. I was president of the UN General Assembly, and the contribution of the United States was not paid on time, so the salaries of the United Nations was in danger. And when the new administration came and this 20% contribution came back, everybody saw that without the US contribution, even to the budget, you can't live. So what we will go from here is United States will try to continue this very strong, presentation or in the world arena. But there are other situations. The world is less dependent on Russia than it is on China. For Russia, it is energy, grain, some military equipment for some countries. But for China, in every piece of your life, from your T-shirts to your chips or your whatever, your Apple phones or whatever it is, you are very much dependent. So you can't do the same thing you are doing to Russia, to China. And China is another reality, especially in Africa. And in our childhood, younghood, we were dealing with North-South dialogue, G77. Now the G77 has a different name, China and the G77. So G77 became a different entity. And if you go to Africa, because of these road and belt politics, you will see that the presidential palaces, airports, ports, railroads, highways are mostly constructed by China. And when it comes to the United Nations, there's a China favoring group which mostly either either supports something with China supports or doesn't or abstain. So this is the new world, and success is the main pillar. If you are successful, you go on. If not, then other tries for successful things will happen. UN is not successful. NATO was not successful. EU was not successful in the Ukrainian invasion of Russia. So other regional institutions, if they are successful, will not, of course, replace the whole global body of the United Nations, but we will look into them as if they will solve regional and geographical difficulties in the world.
It's so interesting to hear you say how you feel the world has actually become in many ways more dependent on the United States, while others seem to argue that they think it's becoming a less and less relevant global power because of the other rising axes. But General Kimmitt, let me take this to you because you were also, Ambassador Boskurt, speaking about NATO. General Kimmitt, a true sense of urgency has been injected into the organization, as you are aware, in recent years. Would you ever have envisioned, back in 2006, when some complained that NATO itself was becoming an obsolete organization, that was actually only served to create further division with Russia, would you ever have envisioned that it would be in the position it is in today?
I have no doubt that we have seen the end of NATO for at least since its beginnings. Everybody for years and years has said NATO is in decline, NATO is irrelevant. They said that when the wall fell down in '89, when NATO was struggling with this question about what's our task and what's our purpose, now that Russia is no longer the major threat which coalesces NATO. Then the Balkans came up, and it was very clear that NATO made a conscious decision to support the slaughter that was happening down in that region. So in many ways, NATO took on somewhat of an extended mission, but it demonstrated through what we see as relative stability in that region that there was a need for NATO and at that time. And we then went through the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. NATO did a wonderful job, regardless of the consequences and the outcome of Afghanistan. The fact that NATO was able to relieve much of the burden on the United States by taking over a number of sectors and command the entire operation, NATO did demonstrate its viability. So it should come as no surprise that when we saw the illegal invasion of Russia into Ukraine, that NATO would step to the front. Now, how that happened, why that happened, in many ways we went back to its original founding, which was the purpose of NATO. As the old joke says, the purpose of NATO is to keep the Russians out and the Americans in, and some would also say to keep the Germans down. But I think NATO, from its core mission and from its core foundation in 1947, stood up and is stepping up to what's happening in Ukraine. Now, is that a surprise? To many people it is. For many, many reasons. The defense budgets that had been put together by the countries in previous years to support NATO and its own national defense, from a 4-year holiday from history that we went on in America over the previous administration, towards a longer belief of a holiday from history that a resurgent Russia would never attack the West. In many ways, last February was a test, and I'm glad to see that NATO stood up to the challenge of what's happening in Ukraine, and I'm proud as an American that we were able to be at the front of that support. So I would say that not only now, just as NATO had to make a decision in the late 80s whether it had a purpose, and just as it made a decision last February whether NATO had a purpose, I think in many ways one positive outcome, if there could be any possible positive outcome of what we're seeing in Ukraine, is that NATO has stayed together, has stayed cohesive, and hopefully it will maintain that sense of cohesiveness until one day, God willing, that this war, this illegal invasion, this war crime that is going on inside of Ukraine is over.
Thank you so much for that. It's amazing, though, because we still have people arguing whether or not NATO created the conflict with Russia or whether NATO has defended against what was an inevitable conflict with Russia.
No, and we've heard those arguments before, that somehow there were these agreements that NATO would not expand to the east, that NATO enlargement was the proximate cause in the original sin which caused this invasion. I would simply ask the question of the Romanians, the Hungarians, the Poles. Were they allowed to make sovereign decisions about how they wanted to move forward that was not geographically based, but it was a sovereign decision made by their country over their security, their future, their alignments? And if somehow when we have this sterile argument that somehow NATO as one organization and Russia as another organization has the authority to make sovereign decisions for sovereign states about what they want to do, then I think that's a misunderstanding of what sovereignty truly means.
Okay.
If Russia doesn't want the Ukrainians to be part of the West, they've got to live with this, not use force to try to change that dimension.
Okay. Mr. Biruta, now I have to ask you this at this point, because as these new axes tend to form, it seems, or form or reform, I should say, Africa can often get caught in the middle. There are powerful partnerships on both sides, and each side can see Africa as a proxy against a perceived enemy. We saw it during the Cold War, and many say we're seeing it again now. How does Africa strategically build relations with the global powers that it needs to have relations with, whether commercial, political, etc.?
That's exactly the situation we need to change. Africa should not be there just as a proxy or see Africa as a continent which should align itself to one or the other power. Africa should be there by itself. And that's what I was saying earlier. We have poles around the world, and Africa should reform itself to become one of these poles, and to be able to count as an equal partner to other poles or powers. That's what we need to change, and Africa should not be perceived as a continent which is there just to align either to the west or itself to the west or to the east. And in this geopolitics, Africa should not be considered as just a country. Africa is diverse, and you have seen it even with the current crisis, the war between Ukraine and Russia. Africa has voted differently. Some countries have voted with the West, some others have abstained, some others have voted with Russia or supported Russia. So Africa is not unique. It is composed of 54 nations who have different strategic interests when it comes to just take position in the world affairs. We have been talking about China, for example. China is a partner to Africa, as is Europe. And by the way, China is a partner to Europe as well. So for Africa, we are requested to choose. Are you with China or not? No. What China is, why China is coming to Africa, why China is becoming an important partner to Africa. Africa is looking at its own interests as everybody else is doing. So Africa should not be seen just as a country, and Africa is mature enough to be able to choose its partners, be it for trade, be it for other political and strategic interests. Africa is mature, but once again, Africa is not a country.
Right. But it is
composed
a
of 54
strategic tightrope.
sovereign nations.
Yeah. It's a strategic tightrope to walk because there still are very powerful players on either side vying for influence, vying for relationships, and that's politics. That's geopolitics at its best. I'll tell you what, I'm hearing a bell. I'm not sure if that means we're supposed to wrap, but we did get a quite late start. So one final question, actually, for Mr. Ponta. And I'd like to go back to the EU, because it is so crucial when we look at the relationship globally and, of course, with the war in Ukraine. We look at an organization like the EU, we know its enlargement post-Cold War, at least in large part, brought dramatic economic prosperity to a number of the countries that had joined. But do you think it's done as well, creating and maintaining, a common European identity that would possibly prevent further division and conflict? Because we are seeing now, when I look at Romania versus Hungary, and Hungary siding more so with Russia's interest in the conflict in Ukraine, though he is an EU member and Romania's immediate neighbor, how is the EU doing managing cohesion?
Very bad, definitely. And once again, I am referring to some countries in the Western Balkans which have been ready to be member of the European Union, and only for internal political interest of some countries never happened. By the way, I was preparing my intervention in Turkish. I'm happy I didn't have to do it because my Turkish is still very poor, but I'm speaking the same language with the ambassador next to me, asking when is Turkey ready to be member of the European Union? Because I think it has been ready for a long time. So European Union, it's still giving the feeling that there are first-class citizens, second-class citizens, and third-class citizens.
But we have to remember the internal politics that various countries are up against when we talk about EU expansion. I mean, many say the reason Brexit happened is because this fear was sown into so many Britons that the EU was going to expand and allow, 40 million new British potential citizens coming into the country from new EU members, most notably Turkey. It was tragic to see that happen, but that's the political reality on the ground. I know you think there should be an expansion and it would seem fair, but if the political reality for individual leaders is different, it's not going to happen.
The political reality of the leaders should not be totally opposed to the political reality of the people. That's my opinion. And by the way, why should Turkey now, today, join European Union? As long as at the border between Turkey and Bulgaria, the energy prices are 3 times higher in Europe than in Turkey. That means Turkey has a better energy policy than European Union. Why Europe, in my opinion, it was a very good reaction to the humanitarian issues of Ukrainian refugees. Why Europe treated so bad the refugees coming from Middle East? I mean, we didn't treat them like we are treating the Ukrainians, which is bad. So Europe, it's still undecided to treat everyone based on the principles that are asking to other countries, and this creates a lot of frustration. NATO, I'm very happy to be a NATO member, but first of all, I'm very happy to be a US friend, because NATO without US, it's just something that's very good for meetings and talking. And so that's the reality. That's the reality. And I think European Union, right now, it's losing the war. This is my opinion. Russia is losing the war, and China is very happy. Europe is losing the war, and everybody else is happy. And if we wish to be a winner after this war, we should start treating all the others as citizens of first class, like the ones that are deciding in Europe. As long as we treat with arrogance and with okay, wait, you are with Putin, you are not doing this, we will lose the war. That's my opinion, and I say this here in Istanbul, the best city in the world, by the way.
I agree. I don't think anyone would argue there. Volkan Bozkır, final words.
I think, as I mentioned, without the United States, no institution in the world is now feeling powerful enough. I think we must also consider that when we talk about NATO, of course, United States is the main pillar. But think about if Turkey wasn't there. I think without Turkey, NATO will not be there either. Because Turkey is controlling the straits, because of the skillful politics by President Erdogan, the grain deal has been achieved, because prisoner exchange has been achieved, because many other issues which wouldn't have been possible is achieved, and Turkey having the second largest army in NATO, I think is neglectable. So I would suggest our friends, the United States, in state politics, you can't be romantic or sentimental. So if you have feelings, good feelings about a country, it's okay. But this should be in dinners or official visits. You can call yourself Bidenopoulos, but it doesn't mean that the enfant terrible, the naughty child of Europe, should be favored against Turkey, which is controlling borders with 13 different, very colorful countries and trying to establish peace and stability in the region and in the world.
Volkan Bozkır, that will have to be the final word. That session went by very quickly, and we're still about 20 minutes behind schedule. So I'd like to thank all of my panelists, Romania's former Prime Minister Victor Ponta, Rwanda's Minister of Foreign Affairs Vincent Biruta, and Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. Thank you all so much for being with us. What a fascinating session. And thank you everyone for being with us as well.